Hello and welcome to a Marketing Sherpa webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to take a deep dive into how you can leverage data better to create a personalized experience based on the work of Mr. Lube Canada. So let's start by thinking of the challenges that we're talking about here, right? I'm sure you face the same challenge. I know we face it here at Marketing Sherpa and Mech Labs, and this is the same challenge Mr. Lube faced. Sometimes you just have too much data. Looks like that closet mess you see there. There's so much going on. So how do you put it into these neat, orderly rows where not only is the important thing that the data is easy to see and easy to access, but you can actually use it to better serve a customer? Well, today we are going to be talking to a warrior who worked through years and years of trying to organize data, complex data, to end up better serving a customer. Please join me in welcoming Andrea Shaikin, the former Director of Customer Experience and Engagement at Mr. Lube Canada. Thanks for joining us today, Andrea.
Thank you, Dan.
And so it was funny, just so you know, Andrew's going through, we have a few technical difficulties here with the webinar. And so Andrew, you've been a real trooper, you're powering through it. We appreciate it. And I said, there's no shortage of irony here, right? We're trying to do something very technically easy when we have technical difficulties. What Andrea did was very, very complex, and I'm sure she came into many, many more difficulties. Just shows how hard these things are. But before we dive into that, Andrea, just give us a sense of how do you get to be the Director of Customer Experience and Engagement at Mr. Lube Canada? What did that day-to-day look like?
Well, it was a very interesting evolution for me. I started off primarily as a loyalty marketer, and I went to Mr. Lube to become a Director of Customer Retention, really. Customer retention for Mr. Lube was a lot to do with email and a lot to do with communication. But what we were really worried about was an ongoing customer experience. So I became the Customer Experience and Engagement Director, and my whole role was all about communicating with the customer to make sure that they were feeling really good about Mr. Lube and keeping Mr. Lube as top of mind when it was time to make automotive service decisions.
Okay, excellent. And you can see a picture of Andrea on stage there at Marketing Sherpa Summit. That's because she did present this case study at Marketing Sherpa Summit. And irony of ironies, there was also technical difficulty there in the recording, so she was kind enough to come and join us and share this through a webinar with us today. And I'm Daniel Burstein, the Senior Director of Editorial Content at Marketing Sherpa. You can see me there on stage at Marketing Sherpa Summit as well. And I bring that up because you too can be on the stage at Marketing Sherpa Summit sharing your customer first marketing case study. If you have a customer first marketing case study you'd like to share, let us know about, just go to marketingsherpa.com/inspire. Andrew, what was your experience like as a speaker at Summit last year?
Oh, Daniel, I had the best time at Summit. It was one of the best organized conferences that I think I've ever been to, and that's not a paid plug. I saw that everybody was fantastic to work with, and all of the attendees were so keen and so into what they did, so passionate about communicating with customers. It was a real pleasure to be there, and I would recommend for anyone to put their name in and try to participate.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and hopefully everyone listening on the call will. And so before we dive into it, this is a live webinar. We have this unique experience to interact with each other. So if there's any questions you have, if you want to see some related content, if you want to share yourself, how you did something with marketing, how you did something with using your data to help customers more, you can use hashtag Sherpa17. We'll be on there sharing related content. We can pivot this webinar and take it anywhere you want based on the questions you ask. And again, it's a great way to connect with other marketers passionate about customer first marketing and using data. So let's start with some research. As you know, at Marketing Sherpa, we do a lot of research here, and one of these things is we asked 2,400 consumers about why do you unsubscribe from email lists of companies, right? And as you can see here, the #1 reason was I get too many emails in general. And so we get that question from marketers. Obviously, the next question is, well, I can't control how many emails that customers get. So what can I do, right? Sure, you can control the only emails you're sending, but you can't control everything going into their inbox, so what can you do? And so I think one of the answers to that question is you don't just send email, you serve your customers. Email just happens to be the channel, but you serve your customers through the email. And it seems like that was the whole goal that you were going for here, Andrea, with what you were doing at Mr. Lube.
Absolutely. I mean, auto service is not something that you do all that frequently. It's not like a quick service restaurant where you're getting a lot of communications and you might go back on a very regular basis. The frequency is not that high. but you still want people to be aware that your products and services are there when they need them on their time. And so making sure that the communications are relevant actually reduces that feeling of, I get too many emails. And I think that's true for a number of different types of retailers or service providers. The whole goal was to increase the relevancy so that people felt they were getting something that was useful to them when they needed it.
Okay. So to help us understand your case study, give us an understanding of who Mr. Lube is.
Absolutely. Mr. Lube is really the pioneer in the quick service oil change industry. The company is now 41 years old. It was established in 1976 by a family in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And they realized that making an appointment and having to wait to get your car serviced was not really that convenient and not really that intuitive for any customer, especially themselves. So they created this company where you could drive right into the service bay without an appointment when you needed it and get your service while you wait in your car. They have a couple of stores, about 52 stores in Walmarts where you leave your car while you shop, which is a different kind of convenience, but a number of the stores are just like this one you see here in the picture. And the great thing about Mr. Lube is that it's fully national all across Canada. You can find one pretty much anywhere. There's over 170 locations.
Are the locations in Quebec called Monsieur Lube, or is it still?
There are locations in Quebec called Monsieur Lube, but there have been a number of different iterations of the signage. Some have just an M with the oil drop dot, and some don't. So there have been a few iterations as the language laws have changed, but yet you can find us in Quebec too.
That's perfect. So tell us, what challenges were you facing?
There were a number of challenges. The Mr. Lube Club email database, which is huge, over 1 million records, is gathered in store every day when customers appear and have a service done. But the problem is that the unique identifier for those customers is the license plate, not the person. So when you get a new automobile, let's just say, or if there's more than one car per household, there were a number of challenges in actually sorting out the data, knowing who to speak to and when. On top of that, we have all these franchisees who want to best serve their customers, and you were owned by the last store you visited. So if you visited a store close to your home, that franchisee was essentially the one who owned your customer data. But then if you changed and went to a store that was closer to your office, that franchisee would then own the customer. So there was a lot of back and forth, a tug of war almost, between the franchisees because they wanted to all make sure they were best communicating with customers and inviting them back. On top of that, the data that we had was just like that messy closet you were talking about. We had 40 years of data going back to probably pre-digital data actually, and it was not really organized into useful customer information. So these poor franchisees who are trying to serve their customers really don't have all the tools they need, and the marketing team couldn't support them as well as we wanted to make sure that the customers really heard from Mr. Lube at the right time.
Yeah, and I believe when we talked earlier, you said 41 years of transactional data you had. So, I mean, we're talking, there's legacy systems, there's all these different franchisees, all these different systems talking to each other. So if you're on the webinar, if you're listening right now, hey, maybe you relate. You've got old systems, you've got all these different systems that are talking to each other, you've got this complex data. But if you're on the call and you're just starting out, if your company's new, if your company's fresh, you might get some insights on how to build it right from the ground up so you don't get into some of these issues with legacy systems and complexity. And so the best way to overcome that when we're inside our company or we're looking at all of these, different internal challenges is to put ourselves in the customer's shoes. And that is exactly what you did, right, Andrea?
Exactly, Daniel. I am a customer of Mr. Lube, and I am also a customer of a number of retailers and service providers. I get a lot of email. And as a customer of Mr. Lube, I was actually not receiving as much in the way of communication as would have benefited me to keep Mr. Lube top of mind when I needed automotive service. I'll give you an example. I used to drive over 100 miles every day to get to and from work. That means I needed oil changes far more frequently. The system was only set up to send me a reminder after a 90-day period. I would have needed an oil change far earlier than 90 days. I actually didn't get any reminders. I went in before they would even show up in my inbox. There was a missed opportunity to talk to me and remind me of other products and services. That kind of thing really resonated with me, and I thought, as a customer, how would I like to be communicated with? And that really helped me to decide what was important when we were trying to build a new system to address this problem.
Okay, now building a new system to address this problem is a big, big project. So how did you break it down to make sure that while you were building this system, you were also making sure that, hey, you had some of those short-term wins? Because I can imagine, I don't know who your boss was, but my boss wouldn't just say, hey, yeah, take a few years, fix this, then get back to me, right? We need to show results, every year, every quarter, every month.
Absolutely. I was trying to deliver some results for the organization. Obviously, there's a lot to do, and I didn't want to leave anything by the wayside while I was working out how best to build the system. So I basically was swimming in two streams at the same time. While I was working on building a solution for a long-term program, and there were a number of iterations for how we were going to get there before we actually landed on the right solution, I made a number of short-term improvements, a lot of them digital, so that when we did have a proper program in place to email customers, their interaction, their two-way dialogue with Mr. Lube would be enhanced.
Great, so if you're facing a similar challenge, you got this major project ahead of you, whether it's data or something else, make sure you look for those quick wins that you can be having, like this duck here along the top, right? Where your customers see these quick wins, whoever your boss is, whoever your clients are seeing these quick wins, while, hey, underneath that service, you're paddling like crazy just to make that bigger project happen. So I want to get to that bigger project, and we're going to spend some time definitely diving into a few of the key lessons you learned. But first, let's look a bit at that surface and some of these basic changes you made. So talk to us about the SEM landing page changes you made.
Definitely. So in part as a result of mobile get-in, we had no choice but to make some changes to the landing page. We made it mobile responsive, which was a huge win. The previous mobile page wasn't that easy to navigate. We also added a torrent, if you will, with a third-party partner to help us, of pages that were all service-based. So you could find a service at a local Mr. Lube based on your location. So it was much easier to find the store and then to find the service that you were looking for. And both of those things were also mobile. So all of that really helped. I figured if I was going to email people and invite them to come to the store, I would like them to be able to find us using the tools at hand, which are normally the web, and often people use that on their mobile device.
So in that screen cap on the left, all that, we can see kind of on the right there, there's some very specific SEO copy targeting a product, headline restoration, targeting a location, Toronto. So in the screen cap on the left, basically what you add is that nice find Mr. Lube, very clear on the mobile device, and then below it, I assume, is that SEO copy, right?
Exactly. The real goal from a digital perspective was to be found online, because sometimes people are looking for auto service on the fly. They're not sitting at home doing research ahead of time. In some cases, the oil light comes on. And so we wanted to make sure we could be found as easily as possible.
Great. And you also improved your promotion strategy, added some more services. Something I really like about this slide is if you look at that headline on the left about the spring tire change, we've done a lot of testing where we found showing what customers get first before what they have to do is very effective. And that word get can be very powerful. So I love this headline, how you cross out schedule, you say get, and you emphasize today, that they can do it right away. Why did you do that?
Well, I'm very happy to hear that research shows that this was the right thing to do. Essentially, Mr. Lube has added a number of services over the years. They went from doing oil changes to adding tire services, and they're always looking for new and innovative services to add so that their customers have more reason to visit. The main point about Mr. Lube that has resonated with customers over the years is the convenience factor, that you don't necessarily need an appointment. So taking schedule out and putting get in had a lot to do with that, but these images also show you the kind of updates that were made. We didn't even show you the old ones because they were really not in any way as attractive or with as strong a call to action. This was the kind of thing that was implemented as we were looking at making a better go at email.
Yeah, and a key element with that too, with the tires, I just want to point out. So we're here in Jacksonville. We don't do this. So anyone in the southern area of the United States, you don't even think about this. But in Canada and in northern climates, right, this is something they're doing regularly. Twice a year, you're changing your tires between spring and winter. So this is also a regular touch point for the client, right? You're not just trying to sell tires here, right?
That's right. We're actually selling tire services, and it's true in many parts of Canada, as in many parts of the north of the United States, you have to change your tires in order to drive in the winter. Winter conditions can be very treacherous. And from a profitability standpoint, that could add 1 to 2 visits per customer per year. So you want to make sure that you really grab their attention so that they know that they can come to Mr. Lube and get that tire change done quickly in the same day without making an appointment.
Okay, now let's move on to the next thing. And remember, underneath the service, meanwhile, this whole time, Andrea's working in the background with her teams, trying to get all that data right, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, you also sought to enhance your social media. What were you doing here, Andrea?
We had some presence on social media, primarily Facebook and Twitter. That's kind of where the customer demographic lives for what we knew about the group of customers that go to Mr. Lube. But it wasn't as much of a focus, and we really beefed up that focus. A person on my team who is absolutely incredible at keeping track of social, making sure it was diarized, spent a lot of time giving it more of a presence and linking it to the products, the services, and the stores. And this gave us a little bit more access really to speak to customers. Again, once we established a better dialogue mechanism, we wanted to make sure we were there where they wanted us to be.
Okay, and a key element of customer-first marketing is really understanding what your customers want, how you're serving them, how you're falling short, and how you can make a really honest value proposition, a very accurate message to connect the perceived value to the actual value you're delivering. So to do that, sometimes we just need to hear from customers. How did you improve the ways that Mr. Lube was getting customer feedback?
Well, in conjunction with the operations team, there's a person who works very diligently on customer experience and customer feedback. There was a lot of enhancement made to the feedback loop that was already existing. So the page that you see here is an enhanced page that enables customers to better fill out the customer survey, and it also gives them a chance to use a free form feedback that they can just provide comments of any kind, not even necessarily based on a visit. And this is all collected and sorted through. Useful information is then given to the different departments, operations or real estate or what have you. But the actual page itself was much enhanced, not only from a physical look and feel, but also from a functionality standpoint with the partner who helped with the survey. Mr. Lube has a really high Net Promoter Score, and in the last year it had even gone up a bit more. It's pretty clear that giving customers a way to communicate with you is really helpful.
Okay, so now we talked about some of the surface level things, and in the background, Andrea was digging. And this slide looks way more boring than the Facebook slide or any of those slides, but this is really the crux of what we're here to talk about today. So in just a moment, I'm going to ask Andrea to dig into what are some of the landmines she hit when she's making this data transition. What advice would she give to other marketers? But first, before we dive into this, I want to remind people that they can see this session along with all of the session replays from Marketing Sherpa Summit. It's more than 7 hours of case studies. It's all free at marketingsherpa.com/summit replays. You even see Scott Dickers, the founder of The Onion. He had a really fun session he did. We talked to HCSS Software, a B2B software company, about a really awesome customer-first marketing approach that, for a small company, started to transform their industry and really have them go up against some of the big players in the industry. So marketingsherpa.com/summit replays. You don't get to have the fun we had in Las Vegas, but at least you can get some of the content right there. So let's dive back into it, Andrea. So we were talking about what were some of the key challenges you faced when you were trying to make this transition, and how did you overcome them?
Definitely. A number of the challenges were around that mass of data. So what we called the legacy program was really just reams and reams of point-of-sale transactional data. There was so much of it. We knew there was some useful information in there, but it was really hard to sort it out. And what we wanted to do was find a way to, again, turn the data into useful customer information. One of the things that we tried to do first was buy a software solution. That wasn't really a great fit for us. Then we tried to build something internally. Resource-wise, wasn't a great option either. But what we really wanted to do is bring it from that legacy to an advanced program where there was a repository of the relevant customer information that did not affect the point-of-sale data that was already sitting on us. The point-of-sale data is what's used for financials and forecasting, and we didn't want to mess with that. We just wanted to make sure that the information out of there that we could use was somehow lifted up so that we could sort it and make a better use of that for customer communication and trying to incent customers to visit Mr. Lube.
So, a challenge that older companies have is they have, as we talked about, legacy systems, legacy information, legacy data. I mean, I've seen companies be involved with older hardware and servers where, people in the organization don't even know the language so much anymore, even sometimes those old magnetic tapes. So did you have any challenges just because of the age of some of the data that you were working with and just the age of Mr. Lube?
Yes, in fact, Daniel, we did. We had a lot of data, luckily all in one system, so that was not necessarily a problem, but we had to make a decision. We found a partner actually, and I can talk a little bit about some of their approach, which is why we went in that direction, but they helped us figure out how far back we really needed to go. So we were able to pick, I think it was a 5-year backtrack. So all of the information was available, thankfully, in one system, in a language, in a service system that we could access. But then we needed to figure out how much of that data was necessary. And we actually had to pick through it with the help of our partner and our IT team, as well as our marketing team, to decide what was actually going to be needed so that we could go from legacy to advanced. There were, I think, hours spent just looking at field after field to decide whether or not it was needed for at least the first phase.
So how many, how many different data fields are we talking about, first of all? And then how did you decide which data fields to keep or to port into this new system and which not to use? And let me build on that by asking, and who did you get involved with in your organization to decide that? Because that's a big decision.
Yeah, it was a very big decision. Well, first of all, it felt like thousands of fields, but I think I exaggerated. It was probably more like hundreds. But we did actually sit down with our partner and their technical team, our IT team at Mr. Lube, the marketing team, as well as some consultation from the operations team to understand what we were going to have to pull out to really massage the data so that it became useful customer information. One of the things that we did do was choose a partner. Their philosophy is not to boil the ocean, which I absolutely loved. We didn't really want a system, but we wanted some service to help us do this initiative right. And what we decided to do was pick a kind of initial customer journey, if you will, where a number of fields popped out as we were going through them as ones that were very important. Things like visit cadence, services bought, services not bought, average spend, some of the typical KPIs that you would use. All of that information was in the transactional data, and we identified those fields first and foremost, knowing that we could go back and pull other fields later if we decided we wanted to add on a layer.
Now, I want to ask one more question about the actual how to the data, and then we're going to get into, and you can see, okay, actually, what did this new data empower? But if you have questions of your own, feel free to use hashtag Sherpa17 to ask them. Use the GoToWebinar platform, and we'll see if Andrea can help you with your own data challenges. But let me ask you lastly, Andrea, you mentioned this point of sale data, right? This is sensitive information, financial data. It's used for forecasting and planning for the entire company. This is not just data that marketing owns by itself. Were there any challenges in being able to use this data?
Luckily, there were no challenges in actually using it. We just had to figure out what needed to be essentially pulled out. There were some glitches, obviously, along the way, as I'm sure everyone would identify with, in terms of actually building, the data transfer and that kind of thing. There was some work that needed to be done on that side, but again, all the data was in one place. We basically decided to build a new filing cabinet for sort of a way to describe it, where we were able to pick up a number of those fields, move them, copy them, move them into a new filing cabinet where we could sort them. So that work had a number of stops and starts, and there were a few things that happened along the way. There were a few places where there was some hard coding that we didn't necessarily know was there before. We worked around those. I luckily am not too technical, so there were a lot of experts on hand to actually do that piece of the work, both within the Mr. Lube IT team and the partners IT team, and they were able to pretty quickly identify some ways to work around those glitches. I think, though, that happens in every project, so none of us were terribly surprised. There was just a lot of forward momentum to keep finding solutions.
Yeah, so it sounds like you duped the data and were able to use it yourself, so you had your own kind of repository of the same exact data. So when you were actually playing with it, you weren't touching anybody else's data. You weren't touching what accounting was actually working with, or you weren't touching what any of the other groups in the organization were working with. Is that right?
That's correct. And what we also were doing as we worked was having the knowledge in the back of our minds that if there was a field that we had not duped, to use, if we thought a new customer journey, for instance, we didn't have one for tires at first, there was just one for oil changes, we needed to make one for tires, we had to go back and pull another data set, we could do that. Again, we were literally just copying the data that was in the POS system.
All right, now let's take a look at the long term. What did this data empower Mr. Lube to do?
It essentially enables Mr. Lube to communicate with customers in a much more relevant way and at a cadence that suits the customer. Using the vehicle mileage between services, figuring out which customers had purchased oil change versus non-oil change services, calculating when we thought the next visit would be, and putting some governance around, that question that we saw at the beginning, I get too many emails. Knowing what kind of communication we wanted to send would help to decide how frequently it would make sense to actually message a customer based on their actual customer journey and any type of mass promotion that might be going on for a season or for tire season or that kind of thing.
Now let's take a look at how the email actually looks differently. Now I see that hero image says, are you overdue for a visit? And that was not static, right? That could change based on the data?
Absolutely. So the first one that you see there on the left, that was the old email and it was text-based. It didn't have a lot of variable fields. We couldn't include any coupons in it, and there was no capability for imagery. The one on the right had a number of variable fields. Some of them were the same as the old ones, but I had more. You could change the imagery. There's an ability to insert a coupon, and it was not just on a timer. So a thank you would be sent a certain number of days after you visited. A reminder would be sent a certain number of days after your last visit. This one would be much more flexible. And as a matter of fact, I have to say that I personally, since I've actually moved on from Mr. Lube, I've remained an avid customer. I still drive a lot, and I used to not receive, as I said, reminders, but I received one at 65 days just recently since my last visit, which is far more appropriate to my visit cadence. So this is really working in real life.
Now let's take a look at how it's working. We see 222% relative increase in click-through rate. Let me go to the next one too. We see 29% increase in open rate, 20% decrease in bounce rate. What were some of the early returns you were seeing?
Well, this is very early. So the initiative itself only really deployed shortly before Sherpa Summit this year. There aren't a ton of sales results that have come available yet, and unfortunately I'm not at liberty to share those. But the click-through rate and open rate are very, very indicative of the relevancy of the emails. If you are sending a message to someone right around the time that they need a service and they open it, the likelihood that you're top of mind is much higher. I do know anecdotally that the spring season has been really good for Mr. Lube, so I'm very hopeful that this initiative that I was able to assist with has helped with that. The decrease in bounce rate is also huge because that means the database is much cleaner. So the people that you're sending messages to are more likely to be actual customers who are actually going to come and visit.
So as we talked about, this was a big initiative. And for those listening to the webinar today, hopefully at least you're able to get a high-level understanding of what it takes. And if some of that more technical, complex data stuff went by you, you don't understand that as much, this is some advice that I definitely want you to be able to take away. Because at the end of the day, if you want to do an initiative this big, you've got to get buy-in. And Andrea, for you had a challenge too, because you had franchisees you had to convince. You had a lot of stakeholders. So what did you do? How did you get buy-in? What advice would you give, Andrea?
Well, again, I was very lucky to work with a partner who was able to provide me with a lot of great case studies that I could share with the franchisees. But remember, a franchise organization, it's their money that you're asking to use for any of these initiatives. So I had a chance to speak with a number of them, to present at the owners' conferences, to give them a flavor for what sorts of results you could see and what sorts of changes you could make. And I was able to speak with them and get them to ask me questions so that I would know what was important to them and achieve buy-in internally was a much bigger job than maybe one might think it would be, because you have a lot of stakeholders. We also had to make sure that all of our IT teams and marketing teams were really comfortable with the solution that we were providing. They have a lot of work and investment in this, and I wanted to make sure that they felt really good about the solution provider and the solution that we had proposed.
Okay, and last, this key takeaway, I really like this, Andrea. We talked a lot about numbers today. We talked a lot about data. We talked about technology. We talked about complexity. But at the end of the day, it's about the customer, right?
Absolutely. You know, engaging those people within my organization, understanding their needs, understanding what it was that they were hopeful for to improve their business was almost as important to me as trying to figure out with the partner what kind of work we actually needed to do to achieve that. Getting their real buy-in and getting their input was probably, you know, in my mind, at least half of the battle, because otherwise you're just throwing a system at people. You're not really providing a solution or a service. And I think for a loyalty marketer in particular, providing a service was key for me.
Okay, we got 2 questions here from attendees I want to ask you, but first we're at 2:30. If anyone has to leave, we thank you for joining us today. There will be a survey when you leave. Much like Andrea was asking for advice from her customers, we are also asking for your input. Please let us know what worked today, what didn't work, how can we improve, how can we help you in your day-to-day if you have to go. But Andrea, we've got 2 quick questions here for you. They're actually kind of technical, so I don't know how deep we'll be able to get into. But we have a question here from Coulter. He asks, is this a custom email marketing system, or are you using, you know, an off-the-shelf ESP? And are you generating .svg images? And did the size of the image impact the text-to-image ratio, thus impacting spam score?
But the first answer is this is custom. So we did look at a number of out-of-the-box solutions, but everybody here probably knows that once you start to customize, it adds a lot of cost. And again, Mr. Lube really wanted a service provider, not just a piece of software. And so we worked with a partner. We talked at length about what we were actually trying to achieve. We broke it down into phases to make it a lot more manageable and to not boil the ocean, because you can't do it all at once. Mr. Lube is not a huge organization. There weren't a lot of pairs of hands. In terms of the second question, if anybody wants to connect, I guess, Daniel, you could connect. I can hook them up with a partner, and they could ask those other questions, because I'm pretty sure that has been contemplated, but I'm not technical enough to answer it myself.
Okay, great. We have another question about from Adam about the technology. What is the technology Mr. Lube is leveraging to have their data organized and use the data to increase the relevancy of their programs? So as you mentioned, this is custom, but can you give us a sense of whether there are some specific industry terms that people should be asking about if they're looking for their own partners that do this sort of thing?
Well, I think where I started, that's a great question. Where I started was with CRM, because that's kind of the marketing language that I was accustomed to. So that's kind of where I started. And I was thinking a lot about all of that data-driven, you know, behavioral communication, all of that kind of thing. So a lot of that motherhood, loyalty marketing stuff is where I started. If you're thinking about terminology, I'd love to be able to let you know who the partner is. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that, but what they did was take that philosophy of mine and turn it into a bit of a vision that I was then able to kind of leverage and sort of water and grow and get the word out to my constituents so that they had the buy-in that they needed. But I really started with the language of loyalty.
I love it. The language of loyalty. That's where we should all start as marketers. So if you have any more further questions for Andrea, as you mentioned very generously, she'll connect you with the right answers. Feel free to fill that into. We also have a free form field in our survey where you can give us any sorts of feedback. So when the webinar closes and you get that survey, feel free to put it in there. And again, thank you, Andrea, so much for your time, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was great, Dan. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone.